Hi everyone. Okay, so in this lesson we're going to be taking our CSS a little step further and starting to create special effects that allow you to provide the user with even more feedback. So in the last one we looked at examples where if you see my cursor when it goes above the above a button that it changes to a pointer. But what you'll also notice is, so that's one way of giving the user feedback, but what you'll also notice is there's a change in the appearance of the button when it's hovered over. So what we're going to learn out is how to create those sort of effects on your buttons to really animate your website. Okay, so to do that, we'll split our screen back to what we were working on last lesson. And we'll get our code up. Okay, so we've got what we did in the last lesson, which was basically style these things. Now what we want to do is that we want to get a similar sort of effect to what we just saw on that website for the get started. Okay, so to do that, we need to target the same button, so in the same way, except there's just an additional sort of sub command or pseudo command. Okay, so oops, I just undid, oops, I didn't copy that properly, try again. And what we want to do is put a colon, and then after that what we can do is we can put a command called hover. Okay, so basically what that does is it means that when the mouse is hovering above that particular element, then we can do get it to style the button differently temporarily. Okay, so now if we have a look at that example we had before, when they hovered over, the background color changed. So if we did something like that, then what we'd want to do is take our background color and then modify it. So if we do that, and they had a sort of grey looking color, so let's say much more like something like that. Okay, as an example, and that should be fine, and then I'm going to save it. So you'll see that there's no appearance change at this point, but as soon as I hover over the button, it responds. So that's another way of sort of giving the user feedback that the button is about to be clicked, that your cursor's in the right place. Now, if I click on the button, you'll see that the user doesn't get any feedback either, unless I do something like send them the message. And so you might also want to give them some visual feedback that you've clicked the button, and that can also be done in a different way. So if we now want to target, we can use the same process except with a different command at the end to target when the button is clicked. So we do that. Now the command is called active. Okay. So if we do active, we can then apply a difference. Now what I'm going to do here is that when I click the button, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the opacity or make the color look a little bit more washed out when the button's clicked out, and that's using a command called opacity. Okay, and that should refer to the color. And then for opacity, if I put a number, and we'll put a fairly large number, like a fairly small number to really show the effect. So, oops, try again. So I saved it. So I have my, when I click on it, you'll see that I get a washed out look, but it gives the user the input that yes, you've clicked the button. Okay, so that's another way. Now you could adjust. By the way, if you set the opacity at 1, that means full opacity. So if I was to do that, it means I'll do it again. Sorry. That means that when I click the button, it's not doing anything because it's at full opacity. Whereas if I start to wind the opacity back, I can get a similar sort of effect, and then if I want a more extreme effect, then I can just reduce the number down. So if I wanted to go right down to 0.1, okay, that's taking it a lot. Sorry, a lot further. So really taking it a long way down. And that's probably too much. And with these sort of things, you just want a bit of trial and error. So if we did about 0.6, that's probably keep doing that. Probably going to give us an effect which is reasonable. Okay, so that gives that user that input. Now, so that's so we've animated that button. For this one here, we might like to do something different. So let's say instead of the transition, let's say we wanted to, when they click on the button, that the colors invert so that the background becomes white and the text becomes black. I'm not sure how this will look, but we'll give it a whirl. And so, okay, so then we can use the same process we did before, and we can. We won't want hover, so let's hover button. Wrong colon in. Okay, so now if we want the colors to invert, then we would have the text color being set to black. And the background color being set to white. Okay, so we'll save it and see what it does. Okay, so you can see that that also gives you the feedback, and then you could also add another effect for when the button is clicked. Now the third type of one I'm going to show you is just another type of feedback, and it gives you another sort of style that you can use for maybe the third button. So for this one, what we'll do is we'll do HTML button hover. And this one I'm showing because it's going to show you a couple of other additional sort of commands which are pretty useful. Okay, so if we wanted to have it so that it develops a shadow, that's another one. So we can do box shadow. So for box shadow, there's 4 parameters you've got to enter. Okay, so the first parameter is the horizontal, so how much the, and I'll do extremes just to really show it. So it's how far the shadow goes to the horizontally to the right hand side, and then the next parameter is the is basically how far it goes down. Okay, and then the next parameter is the length of blur. So with shadows, they often look better if they have blur. So you can see that if there's no blur, it kind of looks really extreme. And then if I want to add the blur factor in, so it means it's blurring the whole way, you can see that kind of looks a lot nicer. But even then, that seems fairly extreme. And I think you probably want to go down to, you know, much more subtle effects to get it to look better. Okay, so that's still sort of giving the user a signal that something's being created, but it's still quite stark. So the other thing that you can do, which is the 4th parameter, is you can set a color. Now, for the color, I'm going to use a modified version of RGB, which is RGBA. Okay, so RGB is your green setting, your red setting, your green setting, your blue setting. Now for black, to create black, using the RGB setting, we can put in 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, And then we can put in the final parameter, which is the A parameter, and that is the opacity. So you can change the opacity of the colors. So I'm going to put quite a low opacity in. And then if we apply that, then what you can see is you're getting a much more subtle effect. And you could even play around a little bit more. Okay, now the last thing that we want to show in all of this is what you'll notice is that the transitions are immediate and they're stark. And that's another parameter that you can control, and it's called transition. So for transition, normally if you're doing a button, what you want to do is set it within the primary styling. So if that's how the button looks normally, you want transition to go into that area. And again, what we'll do is take it to extremes. So if I put a transition of 1 second in, what that means is that the transition between what it normally looks like versus once you've hovered over the button or clicked it, it will be a transition of 1 second. Okay, so it's a little bit smoother. Okay, and then you can add in, and normally what they recommend is about 0.5 seconds, which gives you a not immediate jump, but it just gives a sort of smoother transition to it. And you see it a little bit slower. So without that transition number, what happens is if you look at the effect, and these are quite subtle, it's immediate, and the effect, particularly when you click it, is really quick, where it's just putting that transition makes a difference. So pretty much that is some of the effects that you can use. Again, there's a gazillion and one types of animation you can do, but that just gives you a bit of a feel of how they get that sort of professional look about the buttons. Okay, so all of the settings there again are on the website, and please go down and do the exercises that go with it to make sure that you're really on top of this concept before you move on. All right, cheers.